Hey, so we are live. It's been a hot minute. I don't remember the last time we did a community office hours for Boundary. I don't actually remember the last time I did one because I haven't touched office hours for a very long time. So welcome to everyone. It's good to be back. I'm Rob Barnes, Senior Developer Advocate here at HashiCorp. I'm joined by two very esteemed guests. We have Jim Lambert and we have Adam. How'd you say your surname, Adam?
Bouhmad. Yeah.
Bouhmad.
My family's Moroccan, so yeah.
Amazing. Nice. Adam Bouhmad. So very esteemed guest. We'll get into that in a minute. But before we start, you know how it goes. We have to break down the community guidelines. We're going to post that in the chat. But just the long and short of it is, just be kind and respectful, patient with one another, and just generally be nice as you usually would in this community. Don't really need to remind too many of you about that, but we have it there nonetheless. Let's get into this. So how you doing, Jim?
I'm great. Thank you for asking. How are you today?
Very good, very good, very good. I think it's been a while. I saw you in Boston.
It has been a while. We did happen to bump into each other in person a couple weeks ago. That was fun.
Yeah, very nice surprise. I wasn't expecting to see you there. So I didn't even realize you were a Boston native. So,
30
very
years
cool.
now or something like that. So I'm not alive.
How about you, Adam? How you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's 8 a.m. on the West Coast, so yeah.
Early bird catches the worm, as they say. Adam, I already know this. Just to the audience that may have not met you yet, what is your role within HashiCorp?
Yeah. So Adam Bouhmad, I'm a product manager on the Boundary team. So I've been here for a little over a year. So I'm focused on sort of Boundary core. It's been sort of a great learning opportunity, sort of being with the folks here, and I think this is actually my first office hours, so super excited about that.
Welcome to the fam. And Jim, I'm sure a lot of people know you. We've done a lot of office hours in the past, but just in case, you tell the people a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, I'm an engineer on Boundary. I've been at HashiCorp and working on Boundary for a little over 3.5 years now, something like that. I think I was the third engineer on Boundary. I joined Jeff and Mike, who were the kind of transfers from the Vault team when we kicked off Boundary.
Did you actually do any time on the Vault team, or you came straight into Boundary when you joined?
No, I came straight in. I actually had applied to the Vault team, and they cut me over during the interview process, and that was that. I was very, very excited about the opportunity. Still am.
Wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. And we're going to get to see why you're excited about it. So from what I'm told, we have two amazing demos from our two guests today. I think we'll start with Jim. So Jim, what's on your mind? What is it you want to talk about and show us?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you for the opportunity. So sharing my screen already, but I'll chit chat a little bit before I get too far into the demo. I want to talk a little bit about the LDAP features that are available in 13.013 Boundary. We introduced these LDAP features in a beta release. So what does beta mean? It means that these features are available via the CLI, the API, the SDK, and Terraform. Unfortunately, they have not been instrumented in the admin UI yet. So that'll happen in relative short order, I think in this quarter, but it just hasn't happened yet. So like I said, LDAP's available in 13, and once you create an LDAP auth method, then you can delegate authentication and manage groups to an LDAP directory. We support CRUDL, create, read, update, delete, and list on LDAP auth methods, LDAP accounts, and LDAP managed groups. Before I get into the demo, I might just take a few minutes, and Rob or Adam, please feel free to stop me at any time and ask me questions or interrupt me. Might just take a few minutes about the history of this particular feature. I think folks might find it interesting, but we'll see. When we started Boundary, somewhere a little bit into it, maybe a year or so into it, we did OADC. Spent 7 months from like October of 2020 till April of 2021 building an OADC auth method. And during that time, we also built CAP, CAP is an open source library that anyone can use, and many of the HashiCorp products use it to do build OIDC authentication or federated JWT authentication right into your applications. So we open source that as part of our original OIDC work. And then about a year went on, and in November 21, December or so of 2021, I wanted to start working on LDAP auth method, but we were way too busy as a team to pull the trigger on that. So I got permission from leadership and from product to go ahead and work on it as kind of a passion product on the side. And yeah, it was 16 months of effort for me to build it all out myself. Like I said, I started in like December, got permission in November, got started in December 2021, and went all the way till March of 2023 building it out. And that seems like forever until you think about the fact that I wasn't doing it all the time. It's just kind of on the side. And over that 16 months, I built GLDAP, which I've referenced, I think, in the documentation I shared, which allows anyone to build an LDAP service or use a test directory. We added CAP. We added a library to CAP for LDAP authentication that folks can use as well. We did all the boundary, or I did all the boundary instrumentation in the CLI, in the SDK, in the API, and then, of course, onto Terraform as well. So it took a bit to build all that over that time, but it was a real passion of mine. I'm a long-term LDAP administrator and user. Spent over a decade in higher ed, where it's very popular. A lot of former colleagues and former coworkers who wanted to try Bounty, but they couldn't do so without an LDAP auth method. So without further ado, that's enough background information. I can show you the demo. Any questions or anything before I get started on the demo?
Yeah, can we just bump up the font size of?
Sure. Is that big enough?
I think so. Yeah, I think for me it's okay. Hopefully, in the audience, if there's any issues with the font size, please do let us know. But for me, it's cool.
All right. So what I've got here is just Visual Studio. Visual Code up and running, and I think I referenced in the chat this particular repo. It's a boundary LDAP example, and I'm going to use some Terraform to show how one might go ahead and create a boundary auth method, LDAP auth method, and a managed group, and some accounts and some users. Can you hear me? Okay, so make sure it's all set. So I'll do all that. So on the left here, you'll see the Terraform. It's basically just the version of the provider we want for boundary. And then the first thing I'm doing in the Terraform here is creating referencing the boundary instance. So I'm configuring the boundary provider with a local boundary dev instance using the pre-provisioned password auth method to authenticate the provider to do all this Terraform work. And then I'm going to create a boundary LDAP auth method. And I'm going to use open, free online LDAP server that's available from forum systems on the internet. And to use it, I have to configure what the URL is that I'm going to use. I have to configure some other bits in the auth method, like the DNs for groups and the DNs for users. And then I'm going to enable groups. So we'll pull groups out when we do authentication. I'm going to say discover the DN. So all this stuff is documented in the boundary docs, but that's what it will take to create it. I'm not going to make this auth method primary. So because I'm not going to make it primary, I need to create some pre-provision some bits for the user. If I did make it primary, I wouldn't need to do that, but I decided to go this route just to show the other LDAP features. So I'm going to go ahead and create an LDAP account. That forum systems online LDAP server has some accounts in it for scientists like Tesla and Newton and Einstein. So I'm going to create an account for Einstein with a login of Einstein. I'm going to create a user for Einstein as well, and I'm going to link it to the account I just created. So those two will be linked together. Then I'm going to create a managed group for the scientists group. So I'll tell Boundary that look for a group name called scientists, And then any user or account that you come in that you see has is a member of the scientist group, then add them to this managed group. So that's what that little bit of configuration does. And then finally, I'm going to grant a role to this managed group. I'm going to make it basically admin for the default pre-provisioned project that's in Boundary. So pretty straightforward to do all that. The README that you'll find in the repo will tell you all the stuff you need to know about that. I'm going to go ahead and show you just a few bits here. You can query what's in the forum systems LDAP server. You can see the Einstein account, and you can see the scientist group that's there. I also might just mention that there is an LDAP directory built into Boundary Dev. Yeah, as crazy as that sounds. And just to prove that point, I'll go ahead and dump that as well. And of course, it didn't run yet because I'm not running Boundary Dev. So let's get Boundary Devs. Whoops, if I can type. Of course, on internets, no one can type when you're doing a demo. So start at Boundary Dev. It takes just a second to do that. Boundary Dev is up and running, and now I need, just remember what I need here. I need to know for Boundary Dev what, I'm going to go all the way up here. I need the port that the LDAP server is running on. So it's running on this port. And sorry. Export equals, and that this port is over here again. And now I should be able to dump. So that is the built-in LDAP server we built into Boundary Dev just to show you how to do that. So let's go back to the demo. So we'll go down here, and what we're going to do first is Terraform init, and then we'll do apply. I'll go down here just to show that gets applied. And we're building all these resources. You can see them here as they get applied to my dev instance. So now that I've got that all set up, I can go ahead and list. And you can see I listed the auth methods, and here's the new auth method that we just created. So I am going to export that auth method ID so I can use it in other bits. In future commands. And so the first thing I'm going to do then is using that, I'm going to log in via the LDAP auth method I just created. So we're going to log in, and we're going to use Einstein as our username, as our login name. And we just logged in via the new Boundary LDAP auth method. And whenever you log in via the CLI, you'll see some information about what just happened, and you'll see the account ID that you just logged into. So let's go ahead and look at that. Read ID, and we'll go ahead and read that. You can see that it is indeed Einstein. And you'll also see that Einstein has been added to the scientist managed group that we created. So when I authenticated via LDAP, it tied all those together. Now that I'm authenticated via Einstein, via this auth method, I can go ahead and connect locally. I have a SSH server, so I'm going to connect to an existing target that's already part of Boundary Dev, and I'm going to use this Einstein account. It's going to ask me to authenticate locally, if I can type the password correctly. And yep, we're logged in, and you can see that we've logged in now to that SSH server locally, and I'll just disconnect. So that shows the ability to connect, the ability to have those grants, all those other things. The other thing I want to show you is that those grants are really just restricted to the particular account I have. So I'm going to try to read an auth method, this auth method I just created. And I was not granted permissions as Einstein in that managed group to read this. So this will fail, right? That's the way it's supposed to be designed because I wasn't given that grant. So let's go ahead and log into an account that I would have privileges to, so a fully pre-provisioned admin account. So So now that I'm logged in as that full admin account, I can read that. And this is the information about that particular auth method that we created.
And Jim, would you mind talking a bit about managed groups, specifically for folks that may not know what that is, just elaborating on it a bit?
Yeah, so managed groups in Boundary are a way to basically create a group that's managed by an auth method. So instead of a static group where you say, here's a group and here are all the principals, and I'm going to add all the principals, all the user IDs to this group, and I'm going to control it all in Terraform and the CLI or whatever. In a managed group, you're basically delegating the responsibility for who's in, what principals are in that managed group to the auth method that owns that managed group. So if it's an OIDC managed group, then when the person authenticates, there's a bunch of claims, group claims that come in the OIDC JOT and that ID token. And so you take those claims and you say, okay, he's part of, using expression matching. You say this person is part of this managed group. You create a group with a bunch of filters. And then when that person authenticates, they magically get into that managed group because the OIDC provider has asserted that they're part of that managed group with the claims they put in. In LDAP, it's a little different in that in LDAP, you'll have groups that are typically in a separate organizational unit. And so when you configure your LDAP server, you go ahead and tell Boundary, like here, that you'll find groups under this organizational group and then organizational unit. And you say, go ahead and enable groups. So then when it's authenticating, it says, okay, I'm going to get the user authenticated. I'm going to bind as that user to LDAP, and I'm going to make sure that's the right username password and find their DN. And so now that I know what their distinguished name is in the directory, I can find their entry. Then I'm going to go and search for groups in the directory. I'm going to go look in the organizational unit for that you've told me where their groups are. I'm going to look for members that have the DN of the person who's logged in. And when I find them, I'm going to associate those two together. And now, as I've authenticated as Einstein, and I created a managed group for scientists, and I said, yep, these two things need to go together. Now I've delegated that responsibility. And then once you have a managed group, you can assign them to a role, right? So then you can say this role has a principal ID of this managed group in LDAP. And now through the magic of managed groups and an auth method, I've dynamically configured the members in that group, and they'll change as the group membership in the directory changes as well. So it's a very, very powerful way to have all this money you've invested in your directory, whether you're using OIDC to get to the directory or we're using LDAP to get that to the directory. All this effort, years, decades you've put into curating your groups and to having admins and groups to do access for this and access for that. All those existing things you have in your enterprise directory, you can now leverage in Boundary to get permissions and control access.
Yeah, super powerful versus having to sort of go through that whole process of onboarding your users onto Boundary and just
well, and then you have to maintain it all and build some sync and all those other things. I mean, we have ideas about having how to enable that in the future, but for right now, it's a very powerful way to kind of manage that dynamically as people authenticate.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think as well, when we talk about zero trust and we talk about the concept of identity and how crucial it is to kind of taking that approach, the last thing you want to do is be managing identities in multiple different places which represent the same entities. That's it's counterproductive. It's operational overhead, you don't want to take that approach.
And then like you said, it's a zero trust issue too. The thing people should think about in Boundary too is that you can have many accounts roll up to the same user. So you can have an LDAP account, you can have a password account, several OIDC accounts, and you can manage them all up into one user. And so then grant privileges to that user, and then if their accounts come and go, you don't have to worry about that. And in many cases, in many enterprises, that's kind of the norm, right? You might be in 2 or 3 different directories, depending on if you're in a large organization with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yeah, I think Vault takes a similar approach as well.
It does.
They have something called the identity secrets engine.
I think they call it aliases.
Yeah, that's part of the identity secrets engine. Is how you kind of link the different entities together as kind of one logical entity.
We took a lot of inspiration from Vault and how they did their identity. We adapted it a little bit to the unique boundary domain, but yeah, we definitely use that for inspiration for how they did things.
This is awesome. That's great work. I know you do a lot of things in the identity space, and you and I have spoken in some of the Slack channels we have, which focus on identity issues. And it's great to kind of see you bring some of this passion into something that's actually reaching the market, which is fantastic. So, big pat on the back. Well done.
It was fun. I mean, it's kind of weird, but it's been a while since I've done a binary protocol like that's multiplex and stuff like that. So I had a blast, but yeah, I'm a little odd duck that way. So let's go on to session recording, because that's some really cool stuff that Adam wants to talk about. Absolutely.
Adam, over to you.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Jim, if you want to chime in as well, just as I'm sort of going along, feel free. So I'm also running Boundary Dev here. And actually what I'll do, I'll just sort of do this all live. So I'll just cancel this out here. I'll rerun this. And I don't think folks can see my entire window here. So one second.
I think we can only see your browser.
Yeah. Entire screen. Okay. There we go. So running Boundary Dev from scratch. So we're basically going to do sort of like a full end-to-end setup of Boundary here. Live demo. We'll see how the demo gods sort of treat me today. So yeah, I'm gonna log into Boundary.
You're doing it by hand. Good for you. That's why I did Terraform, because I didn't want to worry about that.
We'll see how it goes. Yeah. So just a bit about the feature, right? So session recording has been our #1 most requested feature. Actually, since the launch of Boundary, it was the impetus for Boundary sort of being greenlit as a project here at HashiCorp. So yeah, this has sort of been a long time coming. There's a question about whether, session recording would actually exist in Vault, whether it should be a separate product, right? It exists in Boundary. Vault sort of exists as that sort of credential store for Boundary, right? A credential store being a resource that can retrieve, store, and potentially generate credentials and, different types of access levels as well for those credentials, right? So, session recording, we released an MVP at HashiDays at our 013 release. It's specifically an enterprise and HCP only feature at this time. And pretty much what we have support for is sort of the recording, storage of, and playback of SSH sessions. So we'll actually store your recordings in a storage bucket, as we sort of call it. It's basically a storage backend. Currently, we have support for AWS S3. We'd love to add support for other providers in the future. You can't build it all at once. So that really is going to be driven by sort of customer feedback. Definitely would love to support, Azure, GCP, as well, right? So, I'll just sort of go through the process here. And with Boundary Dev, just for context as well, it spins up a controller, spins up a Postgres database, and it spins up a worker for you. So it's just sort of like a very developer-friendly, proof of concept friendly way of getting your Boundary resources up and running, right? So you can see here, I already have a worker. I'm running Boundary Enterprise. So first thing I need to do, set up a storage bucket. I don't have a target set up just yet. I just have the default targets and right now the default scopes as well. We'll go through that process. So I'm going to add a storage bucket. So I'll just call this global storage, because your storage bucket resources can either exist in the global or org levels, right? So you can have them scoped down, right? If they're global, you can sort of delegate access for that storage bucket to any target in your environment. If it's an org, right, it's just projects that are under that org. So you can sort of have that flexibility in terms of scoping. So I already
can I just jump in and ask a question around this storage bit? This is something I was looking to build a demo and I don't know if it will support it. So there's support for Amazon S3. Is it
Correct.
specifically Amazon S3 or the S3 API?
Yeah, great question. So currently it's just support for Amazon S3. So we don't have support specifically for S3 compatible storage like Minio as an example, but this is something that we're already working on. So
okay.
So I'll just put in my access key and secret access key here. And just for context, right now we just have support for static access keys and secret keys. You can rotate these. For the sake of this demo, I'm going to disable credential rotation. In the future, you'll be able to assume role if that's something you'd like to do.
Do you want to mention what that worker filter is?
Do you want to talk a bit about it, Jim?
Sure. I mean, in Boundary, you have all sorts of filters you can put: ingress, egress, and storage filters. And so this basically just says, this particular any worker that's tagged with this in tags type dev will have access to this Amazon S3 storage bucket. So that would allow a worker that has this filter to be selected as a protocol aware worker for recording. And so when you got to figure out of all your workers which ones I can use for recording, there's think of workers as a big DAG, right? You have this graph of workers with multi-hop and everything else. It's a bit complicated to figure out, and this is just one of the things you have to look at when it's an SSH enabled target and that is got recording enabled as well. As does this worker even have access to the storage bucket at all? Because all workers won't.
Right. So you're basically specifying the intelligent bastion host, if you will, that you want to actually sort of, proxy those connections and then sort of have access to your storage bucket and sort of park those recordings there, right? So great, we've set up our storage bucket here. So, we have it named global storage. I don't have any session recordings just yet. We're going to change that. So I'm just going to go into the sort of generated org here. And right now, just by default with Boundary Dev, you have sort of two generic TCP targets. But I'm actually just going to create an SSH one and I already have a target in mind. So 1 second here. So Ubuntu host. And I just put in a name and a description. I'm going to put in the target address. So right now this is public facing, right? It could also be a private facing resource on my network. I'm going to specify the default port that our worker is actually going to connect over. I'm not going to specify a default client port. This would actually be the port that I would connect over as a user. I'm okay with ephemeral ports for now. I'm not going to specify a worker filter. So Boundary is actually just going to pick sort of a worker for me that's able to actually sort of take that request. So I'm going to click save. And one thing that I need to also do, because this is a protocol aware sort of target, I need to add injected application credentials, right? So I'm going to create a credential store here. So I could choose to use static credential stores. So it's sort of like a very rudimentary key store value within Boundary, or I could use Vault. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use the static.
Does this need to have a credential store in order for session recording to work?
Great question. It does, because you can only record sessions that are of type SSH, because we're actually doing the protocol decoding there.
Right, and the important factor is we have to decode the protocol, so we have to have the credentials to do that.
Okay, that makes sense.
I'm just creating my credential store here. And I'm going to grab credentials. Have a private key. Let's grab this here.
Oh, now I can get into
I'll rotate this later.
I have that IP address. I can get in there.
You can try.
Let me type in. Let me screen grab and start typing that private key in.
All right. So now we have our target. If anyone wants to hop on this box with me, feel free. We're going to add our infected application credential. Great. So now we have credentials configured for our Ubuntu host here. I'm going to enable recording. We're going to specify our storage bucket. Click save. So now session recording is enabled. Great. We have our injected application credential attached to our target. So now we're going to actually attempt to make a connection here. So I'm going to log in, Boundary. I have my Ubuntu host here, right, that we just created. I'm going to click connect. I have my ephemeral port. So now what I'm going to do, I'll just actually put this side by side. And we're in the box. So, I can do whatever. I can look at this file here, exfiltrate.txt. Looks like it's a cat of Etsy password. That's concerning, right? This was used for a demo a while back. And what I'll just do is exit. Great. So now if I just switch back to the admin UI and go to session recordings. I think it's saying that it's recording because the session is still active. I'll cancel that. Okay, so the session's been completed, and there's quite a bit of interesting metadata that I can see, right? So you could see sort of the in-progress recordings. So here I can actually see, okay, I have a recording that has completed from the user admin. Obviously, that was me. I can see the target that I connected to, the scope that that target's actually associated with, the duration of that session, right? And I'll also be able to see the connections associated with that session, right? And of course, the timestamp of when that session actually started. So I'll click view. There's only one connection here. So you can imagine if I had X11 forwarding enabled, or if, I spawned sort of like multiple, sort of connections to my SSH target, or I was using like an Ansible script or something of the sort, you can imagine that you would have multiple connections here within that specific session that was established, right? But you can see the bytes up and down. You can see the duration as well of that specific connection. And then I also have the ID, which is going to come in handy, and I'll explain that later. And of course, yeah, related information on sort of the right side. So, pretty sort of useful stuff. I can click play here. And we can sort of see the full playback. And this is responsive to your terminal size. So because I went full screen, that's why it's sort of displaying in that way. Yeah, so that's sort of the full sort of end-to-end demo there. Another thing that I can actually do is if I grab this channel ID, I should be able to fetch that recording. So if I download and then put the ID of, let me try, perhaps it's the connection.
I think it's the channel ID.
It's the channel. That's right. Thanks, Jim. Oh, I'm not authenticated.
Authenticated, yeah.
All right, there you go. Yeah, read the screen. We're all looking at it.
I'm gonna sacrifice this bottle of water to the demo gods.
No, exactly. Yeah, live demos. So we're downloading the channel. Great. So I can see I actually have my channel downloaded here as an ASCII cast file. You can actually see those keystrokes that I ran here, right? So pretty interesting. Similarly, you have all the BSR files, those boundary session recording files that are stored in your storage bucket, but you can also download, that ASCII cast file just via the command line. So pretty helpful, right? When you're looking to sort of do some investigation on a specific session, that this definitely could be helpful.
So we could, we could. Okay, so this is an AWS. We have like Lambda functionality and all that kind of stuff there. So what we could do is we could create a workflow whereby it downloads that file and it searches for certain keywords that you want to look out for. And should it happen, it can pump an event to like a security incident management system, or is that still not?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a workflow I'd necessarily recommend. It's not something that we've necessarily tried. I would just keep in mind that these are keystrokes, right?
Yeah.
So, I could flood my terminal with a bunch of different keystrokes and then actually sort of like run a command in between. And, it could be very difficult to sort of parse out what those commands are. But I'm also curious to see like, yeah, what do folks in the security community actually sort of do with this?
Yeah.
I also might point out that the ASCII cast view is converted in real time when you ask to download the recording. So in the BSR files, you'll see a binary version of the channel and all the different types of channels that could be there. So like one of the things we do is we record all different channel types, not just interactive shells, but whatever is being recorded, which I think is a differentiation for Boundary. And so that in the future, as we develop new ways to view or translate or parse out new types and build them in, we'll have all the binary data, even for the old files as well. So when you look at the storage bucket, it's just that, and I think the BSR spec was open sourced, but there's just all this binary data. It's not even an ASCII cast yet. We don't convert it to ASCII cast, but you could have a workflow that did that. We don't even convert it until you ask to, because that's an operation we don't want to spend time and CPU and storage to do.
So it's that I think that there's how do we say, there's kind of detective controls. So the workflow I was talking about is kind of detecting that something's happened, I guess. And then there's the whole audit story, right? Something has happened. You want to go back in time and figure out what's happened. So at the moment, what we have is good for that. I think in terms of kind of detecting things that are happening right now or just happened a few seconds ago and being alerted to it, maybe we're not quite there yet. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Right. At least from my perspective, and folks may have sort of a different perspective than I do, but right now boundary session recording is it's meant to be sort of a system of record. So like really our MVP here was meant to sort of solve the compliance use case. We're definitely interested in making session recording sort of a valuable feature for security engineers. As we were doing sort of customer research and talking with folks in the field, if you look at the Verizon data breach reports that come out every year, they're oftentimes not mentioning session recording, and that's something that we're wanting to sort of change. But of course, that's sort of a matter of priority, right? In terms of like investing in that workflow. So
yeah, and I would just repeat, like we're recording even file transfers. So if somebody does the SCP, we're recording all the data that's gone up and down. If you proxy, if you use TCP proxying for SSH, we're going to record all that as well. So I can see workflows in the future that could be quite interesting. I would also mention that we are not an agent doing this recording. So we're not using eBPF or anything like that, right? We are doing it as a node on the network. So there are some unique challenges in that scenario, but we heard really clearly from our customers that they did not want to manage another agent.
Right.
Yeah, we've. I think I've been in some of those sessions, and I've definitely heard that. We have a few questions from the audience. I'm not sure which ones have been answered in chat yet. One of them I'll point out. I think I know the answer to this, but I'll let Adam respond. Is, does it record sessions using RDP for Windows?
Currently, it does not. So this was scoped very specifically to SSH. RDP is definitely something that's on. Well, it's of interest. It's not necessarily on the roadmap just yet. There is a GitHub issue that was recently raised, and I don't know if we can link that in the chat, so that way folks can sort of upvote that as as they're sort of interested, because that definitely does sort of like sway our influence. And
I would mention that what was one of the reasons we created the BSR as well as a binary format for storing these, so that we could incorporate new protocols as customer design and community demands wanted us to do that. But of course, like any protocol, there are challenges. That RDP is quite a expensive protocol, and you need to be completely protocol aware to be able to record it and manage the injection of credentials and all those other things that have to happen so you can record it.
And I think I would almost flip the question too, in terms of what's the and I don't know if we can sort of do this live. I can also provide my email, but what's the actual use case that you have for RDP session recording? Like, is it more of sort of that system of record, sort of like the compliance need, or is it actually sort of born out of an interest from sort of like an incident response, sort of like event-driven sort of investigations, right? Because I think that also sort of influences how we actually sort of tackle that, right?
Yeah, I think with different, it's quite complicated when you have all these different protocols and trying to decode things in certain ways. So yeah, it's kind of understanding the use case kind of means that whatever is done in a way that's going to be useful to the people requesting it, rather than kind of us making the assumptions that like we think we know what you're doing, but obviously you know exactly what you're doing. So yeah, raising GitHub issues is definitely a good way to kind of engage and feedback to us. Also, just commenting and upvoting on existing GitHub issues as well is also really good. From personal experience with Boundary, I've had a lot of suggestions which are in production right now. So the team do listen. So I encourage you, if you have these use cases, please do kind of get involved in engaging on the GitHub issues, and the team will definitely read it and take it into account when they're developing the roadmap.
I just wanted to kind of do a shout out to the team as well. Like, this effort was unbelievably massive and required collaboration across so many different teams, and so many, from the front end to the design team to the back end to product. I mean, Adam can attest that what we thought we were building was, we ended up building something very different in the end as we understood the problem space and stuff like that. And I do want to shout out in particular to Mike Gaffney, who was the staff engineer, who was the leader, the technical lead of this entire effort. And he onboarded, I don't know, like 15 engineers into the process so that it could be done in parallel and stuff like that, working with design and with the front end and with leadership as well. And it was truly a complete team effort to deliver this feature. And I'm grateful just to have been a part of it and get a chance to work with these folks.
Absolutely. I completely echo those thoughts. I'm sure Adam does as well. Great job, team. We have a couple more questions before we kind of wrap up. So we have, regarding the SSH, Boundary is therefore the SSH client. How does the SSH key certificates rotation occur? Is it ephemeral and generated per session? SSH client vulnerabilities and review part of Boundary protections? Question mark.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I guess just for context, for this specific demo, I actually just used just my private key, right? So I actually just sort of stored that in the static credential store, or in my credential library rather, in my credential store, And that's what I used to sort of authenticate, right? I had the public key sort of on my side and was able to sort of connect, right? You could use, so we do have an integration with the Vault SSH secrets engine. So that way you can actually generate per session credentials exactly in the way that you were talking about, right? Using either the sign endpoint. Right now I'm blanking on the other endpoint. Jim, I'm not sure if you...
I don't remember. I didn't work on that project. So
sorry. Sign or issue endpoint.
Yeah, I've tested the sign. I don't think I ever worked on the issue side.
Yeah, so you can have Vault actually sign, or Boundary will generate sort of the the public-private key pair, and then actually have Vault sign it. You'll get that certificate, or Boundary will get that certificate, and then sort of authenticate on behalf of the user. Or with the issue, you can actually have sort of that generation and sort of the issuing happen on the Vault side, and then Boundary gets that certificate once again and sort of authenticates on behalf of the user. So you can definitely sort of have that dynamic sort of credential flow today with Boundary Enterprise and with HCP Boundary.
Awesome. I think this one's a bit more of an architecture question, but is there a Boundary agent running on the destination machines, or is it just a PKI crypto signature in use?
Jim, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, we are not agent based, so we run the worker in the network for egress typically. So we would need to be there, but we do not run anything on the agent. Now, if you're running Vault to do credential management and stuff like that, then Vault needs to have the appropriate connectivity and appropriate bits running on the host to do that kind of thing. But Boundary does not run an agent on the host at all.
So the way I've sorry, go ahead, Adam.
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, we're a proxy-based solution, right?
Exactly. The way I've always done it, I've done a ton of demos centered around use cases on Boundary. So I'll have a private network with my private workloads in there. I might have another subnet, for example, with Vault in it, and none of these networks I'm talking about are public, right?
Mm-hmm.
I run workers inside each of these networks here. Now, there's two ways that you can run the worker. You can run the worker with ingress, so you can open up a specific port and have a public IP address on the worker, and then the Boundary controller can connect to it that way. Or my preferred way, if you're using HCP Boundary, is you don't have any ingress on your private networks. In fact, it's egress. So what happens with your worker is it punches out to HCP's public workers. And because we have a multi-hop chain of connections, it can create, instead of a proxy, a reverse proxy. So it allows you to kind of have this secure access to your private networks without allowing any ingress traffic into what you deem as private. So you can keep your private networks truly private. And that's one of the advantages of using this type of approach. And literally you need one worker per network if that's what you want to do. I think we've actually got on the screen here just kind of a diagram kind of showing that.
I worked on multi-hop, and every time I run it, I still think it's magic.
It's the best. It's the best. I love it. I love it. You can chain as many workers as you want together. So if the route to get to a specific network is you kind of have to hop through different layered networks to get there, you can literally put workers in each of the networks, and you can define the route in the controller as to how is it going to get to the end target, which is in this 5 subnet deep layer, if you like, right? It can be as simple or as complex as you require it to be. That's the beauty of multi-hop.
Yeah, you could easily build a graph of workers that would be very difficult to understand when it falls apart.
It'd be like shell companies.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think there was a question about pricing. I'm not sure if it's been answered. This is going to be the last one I'll read out. So there used to be pricing was that the first number of connections were free. This is HCP Boundary related. I think it was 3,000 connections or sessions. I don't find that on the page in Boundary. Has that changed? So I guess the real question is, how many free sessions do you get is it? I guess it's per month or something like that.
Yeah, great question. So this actually hasn't changed. It's 50 sessions a month that are free.
50 sessions a month. Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and you can establish as many connections as you want to those sessions. Right.
Amazing. Awesome.
It's important if you're HTTP boundary, if you build an egress worker, a self-managed worker locally, like you're not sending that SSH traffic up to HTTP boundary. It's staying local on a protocol aware worker, right? So from a perspective of keeping that in a locality and into your network, it's pretty cool as well.
I think that's quite important to people, especially if they're running semi-air gap-ish type of environments. They get concerned about where information's going. It's great to kind of know that it's staying all within the boundaries in which you control. So, pun intended there. Amazing. Okay, we are reaching time. Thank you so much. These are amazing demos. We should do this again at some point.
Yeah,
it's been fun.
I was going to say, should we talk briefly about Boundary Enterprise?
Yeah, I think so, because that's a new, because people have been asking, when is Boundary Enterprise coming, and what does that even look like, right? And obviously we've had Hashi Days, the announcements were there, but don't want to make the assumption that everyone was free and available to hear those announcements. So let's just have a quick 5 minutes on that. And
yeah, I guess ever so briefly, and Jim, feel free to chime in just with the context that you've had, I guess, over the past couple of years. But really the thought is that, for the longest time, well, I guess we launched Boundary in 2020, right? October 2020, with Boundary OSS initially, right? And then in October of 2022, we launched HCP Boundary, which is essentially the cloud sort of managed version of Boundary, where we sort of host the controller for you. The thought there being, hey, we're HashiCorp. We actually built, Boundary, so we know how to run it best, right? So we do sort of all the management of the control plane for you. We also have sort of HCP workers that are set up. There are 2 of them in each cluster. And really the thought there is that those HCP sort of public workers can help you sort of get started, quickly when you're doing a proof of concept, help you connect to public facing resources. They're obviously not for connecting to sort of like those private resources unless you're sort of like, chaining sort of workers, right? So, that's HCP Boundary. And then most recently at Hashi Days, on June 13th, we announced Boundary Enterprise. So this is one that customers have been asking for a while, right? Customers that are in regulatory sort of environments where, thinking about like the EU and Germany, where it may be difficult to sort of adopt sort of a cloud sort of, SaaS-like solution. So Boundary Enterprise is sort of the response to that. Paid version of Boundary, complete feature parity with HCP Boundary. Really, the only difference is in the deployment model. So it's very similar to OSS in that you got to sort of manage the Postgres database. You got to manage, the controllers as well as the workers, right? Where once again with HCP Boundary, we're managing the Postgres database, the controller for you. You manage the workers, right? So you're very focused on sort of the data layer. So yeah, that's Boundary Enterprise in sort of a nutshell. Feature parity with HCP Boundary, really just sort of the flexibility there in terms of the deployment model.
Basically, HCP Boundary is a managed version of HCP. Boundary Enterprise, isn't it? And that's kind of what it is. So
it is. It is.
Do you want to manage it yourself, or don't you? And personally, I don't want to manage anything. But I don't work for a bank, so I haven't got any regulators on me saying, "Oh, it's got to be like this, or it's got to be like that." And then, but yeah, that's a good thing. You've got flexible options, and you pick the one that suits your use case, that suits your kind of your appetite, and yeah, we go from there. It's all part of the partnership, I guess, isn't it?
No, totally. And it's possible to trial Boundary Enterprise, but also with HCP Boundary, you can sort of get started immediately. I don't know if we have a link to HCP Boundary that we can put in the chat. But yeah, first 50 sessions are free per month.
Yeah, and the nice thing about it is it's because it is feature parity. You can run the same Terraform on HCP Boundary that you could run on Boundary Enterprise, and it would be no friction to move between. one or the other. So, if you start out with one or the other and you need to migrate for where you want to try one or the other, it should be very straightforward.
Yep.
Stand up either one. That's intentional.
No, that's a good thing to call out. Those migration workflows, we have support for that, right? So OSS to enterprise, right? So
amazing. One final question. Jasmine should be upset if I don't ask it. Where's the t-shirt coming from, Jim? Where's mine? You do it in XXL?
Oh, that's too funny. Yeah, so I see that on Slack over here. My Slack is going crazy with people asking about it. So this t-shirt was part of the swag we did for release. So you would have to talk to the folks who did that. I think one of the designers on team did it, and it is quite an awesome t-shirt. So I'll stand up a little straighter here so people can see it. But yeah, I was so psyched when I got it in the mail. So yeah,
it has
I didn't even
a message now.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But I might be able to get one, but that's not in my pay grade.
Yeah, I think Madeline and Joshua, the two designers on our team, I think put that together with our director of engineering. So shout out to them.
Yeah, I will be shouting out to them, definitely. Respectfully, of course. All right, gentlemen, it's been really good. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed the session. I'm sure the audience did too. And until the next time. Definitely. Virtually this time.
Yes. Next time we'll have to make an opportunity to lift a class next time. So very good.
Absolutely. Awesome. Everyone, enjoy the rest of your day. And that's been Community Office Hours for Boundary. Peace.
Awesome. Thank you.